While my son was swimming peacefully at the beach, an anonymous message changed everything. Leave quietly. Don't say anything to your son. I obeyed without thinking. I found out that at that exact moment, a criminal gang was waiting for the signal to rob my house. My own son had orchestrated everything. Before we continue, subscribe to William's Revenge Stories. Hit the notification bell because we have new stories every day. Leave your like and tell us in the comments what city you're watching from. My name is Mark White. I'm 62 years old, and I thought I knew my son David. For 34 years, I built that certainty, day by day, believing that blood ties were unbreakable. How naive I was. July 20th, 2024 should have been a perfect day. We had traveled to the Florida coast to celebrate David's birthday, a tradition we kept for years. The sun shone brightly on the golden sand, the waves broke gently against the shore, and my son looked happy swimming in the sea, just like when he was a kid. It was 6:40 p.m. when my phone vibrated. An unknown number. I usually ignore those messages, but something inside urged me to read it. The words that appeared on the screen chilled my blood. Mr. White, it's Sarah. Leave the beach quietly. Don't say anything to your son, David. It's urgent. Your life and your property are in danger. Sarah Jenkins, my trusted housekeeper for 15 years, a serious, responsible woman who never exaggerated or caused unnecessary alarm. If Sarah sent a message like that, something truly serious was happening. I looked toward the sea where David was floating peacefully on the waves, oblivious to everything. My heart began to beat wildly. What did she mean, don't say anything to my son? Why would Sarah specifically mention David in that context? I stood up from the beach chair, trying to act normal, although my hands were shaking slightly. I walked toward the public restrooms located near the parking lot, far enough away that David couldn't hear me. With clumsy fingers, I dialed Sarah's number. She answered on the first ring. Her voice sounded tense and scared. Mr. Mark, thank God you called. Sarah whispered, as if afraid of being overheard. I don't know how to tell you this, but 3 days ago, I heard something terrible. I was cleaning the second-floor hallway when I heard voices in the living room. David was talking to someone named Adam Vance. At first, I didn't pay attention. I thought it was a normal business conversation. What did you hear, Sarah? I asked, feeling my throat go dry. They were planning something, sir. David was telling this Adam guy that everything would be perfect, that you would miss your flight back because he would hide your passport during the beach trip. Sarah's voice broke slightly. While you were stuck solving the documentation problem, they would break into the house. The world seemed to stop around me. The sound of the waves became distant. The voices of other beachgoers turned into an incomprehensible murmur. Break into the house. For what? I managed to ask, although I already suspected the answer. To rob the safe, Mr. White. David gave them the exact location in your private office. They talked about $80,000 in cash, jewelry, important documents. They mentioned the break-in would happen tonight between 9 p.m. and 11 p.m., when the house was completely empty. Sarah paused before continuing. The worst part is, David knows the combination to the safe. You always trusted him with everything. I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. I leaned against the concrete wall of the restrooms, trying to process what I had just heard. My own son. The boy I raised, the one I gave everything to, the one I worked tirelessly for decades to support. Planning to rob me? Conspiring with criminals to ransack my own home? Sarah, are you completely sure about what you heard? I asked, desperate to find some alternative explanation, some misunderstanding. Sir, I wish I were wrong, but after that conversation I started paying attention. Yesterday afternoon, after you had already left for the beach with David, that Adam guy came to the house. I let him in because David had told me he was his business partner. They were in your office for almost an hour. When they left, I found papers in the trash. They were drafts of bank documents with your forged signature, Mr. White. Reality began to crush me with unbearable weight. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't my imagination. My son, David White, 34 years old, the man I placed all my trust and love in, was betraying me in the most vile way imaginable. Did you call the police? I asked, watching David get out of the water and walk toward our things on the sand. Yes, sir. I made an anonymous report 2 hours ago. They said they would set up discreet surveillance near the house. But I needed to warn you. David can't know that you're aware, or he might change the plans and escape. I took a deep breath, trying to control the emotions that threatened to overflow. Rage, pain, disbelief, all mixed in a devastating whirlwind. I looked toward the beach where David was waving at me, smiling innocently as if nothing was wrong. How could he act so naturally, knowing what he had planned? "Thank you, Sarah. Stay alert and update me on any movement," I said before hanging up. I put the phone in my pocket and walked slowly back toward the beach. Each step felt like lead. I would have to act normal, pretend everything was fine, while inside I was falling apart. My son had betrayed me, and I would have to face that devastating truth while feigning complete ignorance. I returned to the umbrella, trying to control the shaking in my hands. David was already drying himself with a towel, his face showing that carefree smile that now seemed like a perfectly rehearsed mask. I sat in the beach chair trying to appear calm, but my mind was in absolute chaos. Every gesture my son made, every word he spoke, now took on a completely different, sinister meaning. "Everything okay, Dad? You look a little pale," David commented while applying sunscreen to his arms. The concern in his voice sounded so genuine that for a split second I doubted everything Sarah had told me. But only for a second. "I'm perfectly fine. Maybe a little sunstroke," I replied, forcing a smile. "The sun is pretty strong today." David nodded and leaned back in his chair. For the next few minutes we sat in silence, listening to the constant murmur of the waves. I discreetly watched his every move, searching for any sign of guilt, any hint of nervousness. Nothing. He acted with astonishing calm for someone who had orchestrated a robbery against his own father just hours before it was to be executed. My phone vibrated again. Another message from Sarah. I read it stealthily. "Sir, I found more serious information. I need to tell you something about David's debts. It's worse than we imagined." I stood up quickly, making an excuse about needing the restroom. I walked back to the restrooms, calling Sarah from the same secluded spot where I had spoken minutes earlier. "Tell me, Sarah, what else did you discover?" I asked, feeling my stomach clench with anxiety. "After speaking with you, I discreetly searched David's room. I know it's an invasion of privacy, but I needed to be sure before accusing him of something so terrible." Sarah paused to take a deep breath. "I found documents hidden under the mattress. They're records of debts to underground casinos. David owes $38,000, Mr. White. $38,000 to this Adam Vance." I closed my eyes, feeling the world spin around me. $38,000. A fortune lost in illegal gambling. How long had my son been sunk in that world without me realizing it? "The documents have dates," Sarah continued, her voice trembling. "The debts started 8 months ago. It began with small amounts, $2,000 or $3,000 a month, but in the last 3 months they skyrocketed. There are threatening handwritten notes from Adam demanding immediate payment, or there would be serious consequences." Now it all started to make painful sense. The frequent requests for money David had been making over the last few months, always with reasonable excuses. Promising investments, unique business opportunities, unexpected expenses with his wife Patricia. I gave him the money without question, blindly trusting my son. How stupid was I not to see the obvious signs? "Is there anything else?" I asked, dreading the answer, but needing to know the whole truth. "Yes, sir. On one of the papers the complete plan is written out. David promised Adam that after robbing the safe, they would split the money equally, $40,000 for each of them. With that, David would pay his debt and still have $2,000 left over. The plan relies on you reporting a common robbery, without ever knowing your own son was the mastermind behind it all." I pressed my forehead against the cold wall of the restroom, feeling sick. The betrayal wasn't just for money. It was calculated, premeditated, meticulously planned for weeks, maybe months. David had studied every detail, using my absolute trust in him to commit the perfect crime. He used me as a father, as a source of income, as a victim. "Sarah, you said you alerted the police," I said, trying to regain some control over the situation. "What exactly did they tell you?" "They took me seriously when I mentioned the forged documents and the specific robbery plan. They sent a surveillance patrol which has been positioned near the house since 5 p.m. The officers are in plain clothes in an unmarked vehicle so as not to arouse suspicion. They told me that if the criminals try to enter, they will arrest them in the act." That at least provided some comfort. The police would be ready. Adam and his accomplices wouldn't succeed in the robbery. But that didn't erase the devastating fact that my own son had planned all of this. The betrayal was still just as painful, regardless of the final outcome. "There's one more important detail, Mr. White," Sarah added, her tone worried. "David knows the combination to the safe because you gave it to him 2 years ago when you made him your power of attorney. He has legal access to all your important documents, your bank accounts, your properties. If he wanted to, he could do much more damage than he already planned." Those words hit me like a hammer. Sarah was absolutely right. In an act of fatherly trust, I had granted David sweeping legal powers over my estate. I never imagined he could use that information against me. The naivety of a father who blindly loved his son had now become my greatest vulnerability. "Stay alert, Sarah. If you see any suspicious movement near the house, call the police immediately, and then call me," I ordered, trying to sound authoritative over a situation that was rapidly falling apart. "I will, sir. And, Mark, I am so sorry that I'm the one who had to tell you this. I know how much you love David." I hung up without answering because I couldn't trust my voice. Tears were threatening to spill, and I couldn't afford that luxury. I still had to go back to the beach and act normal in front of my traitorous son. I took several deep breaths. I splashed cold water on my face from the public sink and forced myself to put the mask of tranquility back on. When I returned, David was checking his cell phone with a focused expression. When he saw me, he quickly put it in his backpack with a movement that was almost imperceptible, but very revealing. Who was he communicating with? Adam? The other members of the criminal gang? Was he coordinating the final details of the assault that would happen in just a few hours? "Hey, Dad, I was thinking we could stay for dinner here on the beach," David suggested, pointing to a nearby restaurant with a terrace facing the sea. "They have spectacular fresh seafood. We can relax, enjoy the sunset, make this day memorable." Memorable, the word echoed in my mind with bitter irony. This day would be etched in my memory forever, but not for the reasons David was pretending. "Sure, David. That sounds perfect," I replied, forcing enthusiasm into my voice while my mind worked frantically, analyzing every detail of the last few months. I leaned back in the chair, feigning relaxation, but internally a painful process of reconstruction was beginning. Every recent conversation with David now took on a completely different shade. The memories flowed like an relentless avalanche, showing me obvious signs I had ignored out of blind fatherly love. I remembered March 2024. David came home sweating nervously, asking to borrow $5,000 for an urgent investment in technology. His hands trembled slightly when he signed the promissory note he never paid back. I attributed his nervousness to excitement about the business opportunity. Now I understood he had probably just lost that amount in some underground casino and needed to cover the hole before Patricia found out. Then came April. David abruptly canceled a family dinner, claiming unexpected work commitments. Patricia called me that night crying, saying her husband was distant and absent. I defended my son, assuring her he was just going through a stressful period in his career. How naive I was. He was probably gambling that night, losing more money, sinking deeper into that hole of debt. In May, the requests for money became more frequent. $7,000 to expand business inventory, $4,000 for a specialized course, $3,500 for car repairs. Each time with perfectly crafted excuses, documents that looked legitimate, explanations that sounded reasonable. I transferred the money without hesitation, proud to be able to help my son with his professional growth. June brought more obvious changes in his behavior. David started receiving phone calls that he would answer by quickly walking away, lowering his voice to incomprehensible whispers. When I asked who was calling, he always gave the same answer. "Demanding client, difficult supplier," insiste partner. Now I understood. It was probably Adam Vance, collecting the accumulated debts, pressuring him, threatening him, forcing him to find desperate solutions. The visits from this Adam character to my office had also started in June. David introduced him as his new business partner, a successful entrepreneur in the real estate sector. Adam was a 36-year-old man. He wore expensive suits. He spoke with a deceptive confidence. We chatted briefly on 2 occasions. He seemed friendly, though a bit calculating. I never suspected that this individual was actually a loan shark for illegal casinos who had my son trapped in a web of impossible debts. Last week, just 5 days before this beach trip, David asked me for access to the safe. He needed to review old documents related to family properties for a supposed investment project. I gave him the combination without a second thought. I trusted him completely. Now I understood. He was probably verifying the exact contents of the safe, calculating how much money he could steal, planning every detail of the assault he would execute this very night. I closed my eyes, trying to control the tide of conflicting emotions, boiling rage at David for betraying me so vilely, heartbreaking pain upon discovering that the son I loved unconditionally saw me as nothing more than a walking bank, shame for having been so blind, so trusting, so utterly stupid. My phone vibrated, pulling me from those dark thoughts. A message from Sarah. "Sir, it's 7 p.m. I just saw a black van park 3 blocks from the house. 3 men got out carrying large bags. One of them is Adam Vance. I recognized him from the photos David has saved. The police are watching them from across the street. Everything is ready for when they try to enter." I felt my pulse accelerate dramatically. The plan was unfolding exactly as Sarah had discovered. The criminals were already in position, waiting for the agreed-upon time to invade my home, force open my safe, steal my money. And David was sitting here next to me, acting like the perfect son, not knowing that I knew every detail of his miserable conspiracy. I discreetly glanced at my luggage near the umbrella. I needed to check something crucial. I waited for David to get distracted by his phone again, and stealthily opened the side compartment of my suitcase where I always kept my passport. My fingers felt the empty space. Nothing. The document was gone. The physical confirmation of the betrayal hit with renewed force. David had really stolen my passport. His own father. He did it while I slept soundly the night before, probably tiptoeing into my hotel room, rummaging through my luggage, taking the document with calculating hands. All to ensure I would miss my flight scheduled for tomorrow, that I would be trapped dealing with endless bureaucracy, giving him enough time to complete the robbery. "Looking for something, Dad?" David asked casually, though I detected a certain tension in his jaw. "Nothing important. Just checking that I didn't forget my phone charger," I lied, zipping the suitcase quickly. David nodded, but I noticed his gaze slide briefly to the compartment I had just checked. Did he know I had just discovered the missing passport? Did he suspect that I suspected something? I had to act with extreme caution. If David sensed his plan was discovered, he could alert his accomplices, change the strategy, escape before the police could arrest them. The sun began to set, painting the sky in spectacular shades of orange and purple. Families packed up their belongings, preparing to return home. Children ran, shouting happily, chasing seagulls. Couples walked hand in hand along the shore. Everything seemed so normal, so peaceful. No one would imagine the devastating drama unfolding silently beneath that calm appearance. "Dad, I'm serious. You seem strange today," David insisted, studying me with uncomfortable attention. "If something is bothering you, you can tell me. You know I'll always be here to support you with whatever you need." The hypocrisy of those words almost made me laugh bitterly. What a masterful performance. What absolute cynicism. Talking about support, while simultaneously orchestrating the most painful robbery imaginable. Not just a theft of money, but the complete destruction of trust between a father and son, the annihilation of a bond I thought was sacred and unbreakable. "I'm fine, son. Just a little tired from the sun," I replied, keeping the mask firmly in place. "Let's go to dinner. Like you suggested. I need something cool to drink." David smiled, satisfied, believing he had dispelled my supposed worries. We walked together toward the restaurant while I carried the crushing weight of this terrible knowledge. In a few hours, I would face the most difficult decision of my life. We sat on the restaurant terrace with a privileged view of the ocean horizon. The waiter brought the menus, and David ordered a bottle of reserve red wine, insisting it was a special celebration. Celebration. The word sounded grotesque given the real circumstances. He was celebrating the anticipated success of his robbery, while I was digesting the bitterest betrayal I had ever experienced. While David studied the menu with feigned concentration, I took the opportunity to discreetly check another message from Sarah that had just arrived. "Mr. White, I found something else in David's room. Copies of your bank documents with signatures that don't exactly match your handwriting. I took pictures and am sending them to you now. I think he tried to forge your signature on several papers over the last few months." The images arrived seconds later. I enlarged the screen, feeling my body temperature rise dangerously. There they were. Applications for bank loans for considerable amounts, cosigner contracts for third parties, authorizations for international transfers. All bore my supposed signature, but with small, obvious inconsistencies for anyone who knew my real one. The slant of certain letters was different, the pressure of the stroke too uniform, the loops of the W in white slightly more closed. David wasn't just planning to rob me tonight. He had been systematically trying to defraud me for months, forging my signature to obtain credit, using my name as collateral. If those fraudulent loans were approved, I would be legally responsible for debts I never authorized. My estate, built with decades of honest work, could disappear to finance the destructive addictions of my own son. "What do you think about ordering the grilled seafood platter?" David suggested, interrupting my dark thoughts. "You always said it was your favorite dish when we came here." I nodded mechanically, not really processing his words. My brain was working frantically, processing the full implications of everything I'd discovered. David wasn't acting just out of temporary desperation over gambling debts. This was something deeper, darker. He had crossed fundamental moral lines repeatedly, with cold premeditation, without showing any apparent trace of guilt or remorse. Sarah sent another message. "The forged papers are dated starting in February. There are at least 6 different attempts at different banks. Some were rejected due to inconsistencies in the documentation, but others are still in the approval process. If those loans are approved, they could seize your properties." February, 5 months ago. All this time David had been methodically working to destroy me financially. The direct requests for money, which I gave him voluntarily, were not enough for his growing needs. He needed more, always more. And when I couldn't give him larger amounts without question, he simply decided to take them by force, through deception and theft. "Dad, seriously, you are very distracted," David commented, his tone slightly irritated. "We've been sitting here for 10 minutes and you've barely said anything. If you'd rather go back to the hotel to rest, we can have dinner later." That suggestion immediately alerted me. Going back to the hotel meant more time before returning home, more time for his accomplices to complete the assault without interference. David needed to keep me away from the house for as long as possible to ensure the success of his criminal plan. "No, I'm fine. I was just thinking about some work matters," I replied, grabbing the menu and pretending to study it with interest. "Let's order now. I'm pretty hungry after all that Sunday." David seemed to relax slightly at my response. He called the waiter and ordered for both of us with that casual familiarity that had characterized our relationship for years. Watching him act so naturally, I wondered when exactly something fundamental inside him broke. At what precise moment did my son transform into this stranger, capable of betraying his own father with such apparent ease? My phone vibrated again. This time it was a direct message from the police, using the number Sarah had provided them. "Mr. White, this is Inspector Ramirez from the Central Precinct. Your employee alerted us to the robbery plan scheduled for tonight. We have active surveillance on your home. The suspects are already in position, waiting. We need to know if you plan to return to your residence tonight or if you prefer we proceed with the arrest when they attempt to enter." The time had come to make crucial decisions. I could stay at the beach, feigning ignorance. Allow David to believe his plan was working perfectly. Let the police arrest Adam and his accomplices when they tried to force entry. That would protect my property, but it would allow David to escape without direct consequences, at least initially. Or I could return home immediately, confront the situation head-on, force David to face the consequences of his actions as everything collapsed before his eyes. That option was more emotionally painful, but also more honest. No more lies, no more charades, just the brutal truth, exposed without mercy. The food arrived, steaming and aromatic, but I could barely take a bite. Every piece of fish felt like sand in my mouth. David ate with apparently genuine appetite, chatting cheerfully about future plans, shared projects, upcoming family moments. All elaborate lies, all part of the masterful performance he had perfected over months. "You know what, David?" I said, interrupting his monologue about some supposed family vacation he wanted to organize for Christmas. "I think we should drive back home tonight instead of staying until tomorrow, as originally planned." David dropped his fork, making a clattering noise against the plate. His face visibly paled, even in the dim light of the terrace. "What? Why? We already paid for the hotel for 2 nights. We had plans for the beach tomorrow, too. I remembered some extremely important documents I left on my desk. Contracts that I must review urgently before Monday, I improvised, carefully watching every micro-expression on his face. But Dad, they're just papers. They can wait one more day. We're here to relax, to enjoy our time together, David insisted, barely concealed desperation seeping into his voice. They can't wait, David. These are critical matters that require my immediate attention, I maintained, my tone firm and unyielding. We will finish dinner and leave for home tonight. I saw genuine panic replace the mask of tranquility on his face. His hands began to shake slightly. He fumbled for his phone, probably trying to send an alert message to his accomplices, but I had made my final decision. David tried to hide his growing nervousness, but it was obvious to someone who had known him since birth. His eyes darted restlessly between his phone and my face, searching for any sign that I was joking about returning early. But my expression remained serious, determined, implacable. Dad, think about it. The drive back is almost 3 hours on the highway at night. You'll be exhausted driving. It's dangerous, he argued, trying to sound reasonable, but his voice betrayed his poorly contained anxiety. Besides, those documents you mentioned, they can be scanned and emailed. I can help you with that right now, if you want. I watched him closely as I slowly chewed a piece of bread. Every argument he presented revealed his desperation to keep me away from the house until his accomplices completed the robbery. The irony was devastating. My son was working so hard to deceive me, his criminal dedication was almost admirable. While he talked non-stop, inventing reasons to prolong our stay, my mind was facing a much deeper dilemma than the logistics of the trip. I looked at the man sitting across from me. The child I taught to walk. The teenager I comforted during his first heartbreaks. The young man I hugged proudly at his college graduation. All those memories crashed violently against the present reality. This same human being was betraying me in the cruelest way possible. Where did I fail as a father? What mistakes did I make during his upbringing to produce this catastrophic result? Did I give him too much without teaching him the real value of effort? Did I protect him too much from the consequences of his actions when he was young? The questions piled up without satisfactory answers. But simultaneously, another part of me, colder and more calculating, understood that I was not responsible for David's adult decisions. He chose to enter the murky world of underground gambling. He chose to accumulate impossible debts with dangerous criminals. He chose to plan a robbery against his own father instead of honestly asking for help. Those choices were entirely his, not mine. David, I've already made the decision. We are leaving tonight, I repeated with finality, signaling the passing waiter for the check. I saw David clench his fists under the table, his jaw tensed visibly. For a fleeting instant, I saw something dark cross his gaze. Rage, hatred, absolute frustration at the collapse of his meticulously prepared plan. Whatever it was, it vanished quickly, replaced again by that mask of false filial concern. Okay, Dad. If that's what you want, we'll go back, he finally conceded. His defeated tone would have seemed genuine if I didn't know the underlying truth. But at least let me drive. You're tired, and I don't want us to have an accident from fatigue. That suggestion triggered new alarms in my brain. If David drove, he could control the speed, make strategic stops, gain precious time for Adam and his men to complete the assault before our arrival. Or worse, he could intentionally cause a delay, a fabricated mechanical breakdown, any desperate tactic to keep me away from the house long enough. Don't worry, I'll drive just fine. I know that route perfectly, I replied, paying the bill, and standing up from the table before he could raise any more objections. We walked in tense silence to the parking lot where I had left my car. The sun had completely set, leaving the sky in deep violet tones. Stars were beginning to appear shyly. The sea breeze carried salty aromas mixed with fragrances from nearby restaurants. Everything so beautiful, so apparently peaceful, contrasting brutally with the emotional storm raging inside my chest. As we loaded the luggage into the trunk, David constantly tried to check his phone with furtive movements. I saw him type hasty messages that he erased and rewrote several times. His fingers trembled on the screen. Finally, he put the device in his back pocket with the grim expression of someone who has just sealed an inevitable fate. We got into the car, and I started the engine. It was 8:15 p.m. According to Sarah's information, Adam and his men planned to enter my residence between 9 p.m. and 11 p.m. If I maintained a constant speed, without unnecessary stops, we would arrive at approximately 10:30 p.m., just in time to intercept the crime in progress. The first 30 minutes of the trip passed in almost absolute silence, broken only by the hum of the engine and the sound of tires on asphalt. David stared stubbornly out the window, pretending to admire the nighttime landscapes that were barely visible in the darkness. I kept my hands firmly on the wheel, focused on maintaining my composure while mentally processing how the coming events would unfold. Suddenly, David broke the silence. "Dad, I really need to use the bathroom. Can we stop at the next gas station?" I recognized the tactic immediately. Another strategy to delay our arrival. If we stopped, he would take his time in the bathroom, maybe buy unnecessary snacks. He would do anything to waste precious minutes. Every minute brought us closer to the time when his accomplices would be inside my house, looting my property. "Hold it until we get home." "It's less than 2 hours," I replied without slowing down. "But Dad, I really need to go." "I can't wait that long," he insisted, his tone increasingly urgent and slightly hysterical. "David, you will hold it. We are not stopping," I declared with an authority that allowed no argument. I heard him exhale with obvious frustration. His hands clenched and unclenched nervously on his knees. He took out his phone again, trying to make a call, but the signal in this rural area was weak and intermittent. He cursed under his breath when the connection failed repeatedly. 20 minutes later, he tried another strategy. "Dad, I think the engine is making a weird noise. We should check it before it becomes a bigger problem." I didn't answer. I just kept driving with iron determination. David squirmed uncomfortably in his seat as time moved forward inexorably. Every mile we covered sealed his fate, and that of his criminal accomplices, more tightly. My phone finally rang, breaking the oppressive tension. It was Sarah calling. I activated the speakerphone, knowing David would hear everything. It didn't matter keeping secrets anymore. "Mr. White, the men are forcing the back door lock right now. The police are waiting for your confirmation to intervene," Sarah reported, her voice agitated with adrenaline. David froze completely. His face lost all color, turning a ghostly white in the dim light of the car's dashboard. "Tell them to proceed with the arrest, Sarah." "I'll be there in about an hour," I replied, my voice strangely calm as I watched David slowly crumble in the passenger seat out of the corner of my eye. I hung up the phone, and the silence that followed was deafening. David didn't say a word. He just breathed raggedly, as if the oxygen was running out inside the car. His hands trembled uncontrollably on his thighs. Beads of sweat began to form on his forehead despite the air conditioning running at full blast. "Dad," he finally began, his voice broken, a voice I barely recognized as his. I can explain." "No," I interrupted sharply, without taking my eyes off the dark road, lit only by the car's headlights. "There are no explanations that justify what you did. Save your words for the lawyers you'll need to hire very soon." David sobbed audibly, a guttural sound loaded with genuine panic, finally replacing all the elaborate acting of the past few hours. "Please, Dad, you need to understand. I had huge debts. Adam was threatening me constantly. I didn't know what else to do. I was desperate. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, restraining the fury that threatened to explode violently. And your first choice was to rob me? To conspire with criminals to assault your own family home? To forge my signature on bank documents for months? To hide my passport as if it were some unimportant object? I found the passport," he admitted between choked sobs. "It was in your suitcase. I took it last night while you were sleeping." The direct confession hurt more than the confirmed suspicions. Hearing from his own mouth how he methodically betrayed me while I trusted him blindly was unbearable torment. Part of me still held on to childish hopes that there was some misunderstanding, some alternative explanation. But those illusions vanished definitively with every word he spoke. "Do you know what the most painful part of all this is, David?" I asked, feeling my voice harden, adopting an icy tone I had never used with him before. "It's not the money. It's not the forgeries. It's not even the planned robbery. It's that you never trusted me enough to honestly ask for help. You preferred to destroy our relationship rather than show vulnerability and admit your mistakes." "I asked you for money repeatedly," he exclaimed with growing desperation. "I told you I had financial problems, but you never gave me enough. You always questioned what I needed more for. You always asked uncomfortable questions." His answer hit me like a brutal slap. He was blaming me for his betrayal. justifying his criminal conspiracy because I exercised basic financial prudence by asking what he was spending the considerable amounts I regularly transferred to him on. The absolute audacity of his argument almost left me speechless. "So this is my fault, then," I said with bitter sarcasm. "I'm the villain in this story because I didn't hand you unlimited money without asking reasonable questions about where it was going." "I didn't say that," he protested weakly. I just needed more than you could give me. The debts were growing too fast. Adam was getting more threatening every day. I had to find a quick solution. Solutions that included stealing $80,000 from my safe, for which you knew the combination only because I trusted you completely, I pointed out with relentless harshness. Solutions that required forging my signature to get fraudulent loans, using my estate as collateral without my knowledge or consent. David buried his face in his hands, crying openly now. His shoulders shook convulsively. Part of me, that stubborn portion of paternal love that survived despite everything, felt instinctive compassion seeing him like this. But a larger, colder, wiser part understood that those tears were mainly of self-pity and fear of the imminent consequences, not genuine remorse for the damage he had inflicted. My phone vibrated with a message from Inspector Ramirez. "Mr. White, we have all 3 suspects in custody. They were caught red-handed inside your residence, with robbery tools and compromising documents. Adam Vance confessed immediately, implicating your son David as the mastermind of the entire operation. We will need your formal statement when you arrive." I read the message out loud deliberately, wanting David to hear every destructive word. He groaned in anguish, understanding that his main accomplice had already betrayed him without hesitation. There was no honor among thieves, especially when facing serious criminal charges. "Adam betrayed me," David whispered with pathetic disbelief, as if he expected loyalty from a criminal loan shark who had been manipulating him for months. "We all betray someone in the end," I replied with a dark philosophy born of recent pain. "You betrayed me first. Adam simply followed the example you set so brilliantly." I accelerated slightly, pushing past the speed limit. I needed to get home, to face this nightmare directly, to see with my own eyes the physical evidence of the conspiracy my son orchestrated against me. Words were no longer enough. I needed tangible reality to fully process this emotional catastrophe. David tried to speak several more times during the rest of the trip, babbling incoherent apologies, desperate pleas for forgiveness, empty promises to change and amend his mistakes. I didn't respond to any of it. I just drove with mechanical determination toward the inevitable final confrontation. The city lights began to appear on the dark horizon. I recognized familiar landmarks indicating we were close to home. My home. The place David tried to violate so ruthlessly. Every mile that brought us closer increased the tension inside the car to almost unbearable levels. Finally, we turned onto the residential street where I had lived for 30 years. Police cars with flashing lights partially blocked the entrance. Curious neighbors crowded at windows and doors, watching the unusual spectacle. Sarah was waiting in the front yard next to several uniformed officers. I stopped the car in front of the house. David didn't move. He remained frozen in his seat like a statue, staring at the scene with absolute horror painted on every line of his ruined face. I got out of the vehicle, feeling my legs weaken slightly after hours of accumulated tension. Sarah ran to me, her expression relieved, mixed with deep concern. We hugged briefly, and I felt her trembling in my arms, probably processing the weight of having triggered this whole situation by alerting me to the conspiracy. "You did the right thing, Sarah. Thank you for your courage," I whispered in her ear before letting go. Inspector Ramirez approached, showing his official identification. He was a man of about 50, his face weathered by years of police experience, his penetrating eyes seeming to evaluate every detail with surgical precision. He extended his hand, and I shook it firmly, trying to project a control I didn't fully feel. "Mr. White, I'm sorry about the circumstances of our meeting. We captured 3 individuals inside your property with specialized tools for forcing locks and safes. Adam Vance, 36, with a record for extortion and operating illegal casinos. The other 2 are Scott Price and Mike Turner, both with prior criminal records for aggravated robbery." I nodded, processing the information as I watched 2 officers stationed further ahead handling the detainees. Adam was sitting in the back seat of one of the cars, handcuffed, staring straight ahead with a defeated expression. Our eyes met briefly through the glass. and I saw something like resentment in his eyes before he looked away. Vance confessed quickly when we showed him the evidence, the inspector continued. He admitted that his main associate in this operation was David White, your son. According to his statement, David owed him $38,000 from gambling debts accumulated over 8 months. The planned robbery was a convenient solution for both of them. David would pay his debts and still make a significant profit. Hearing the official confirmation from the inspector's lips felt different than knowing it through Sarah. The words carried legal weight now, formal consequences that transcended the family sphere, becoming a prosecutable criminal matter. My son would face serious charges that could result in prison time. "Where is David?" the inspector asked, looking toward my car, where my son remained motionless in the passenger seat. "He's right there." "He traveled with me from the beach, not knowing I knew his plans," I explained, feeling renewed bitterness as I remembered those torturous hours of faking normalcy. The inspector walked toward the vehicle, followed by 2 officers. They opened the passenger door, and David got out slowly, moving like a sleepwalker. His face was swollen from crying, his eyes red, avoiding eye contact with anyone. The officers asked him for identification, and he handed over his wallet with trembling hands. "David White, you are under arrest as a suspect in the planning and execution of aggravated robbery, document forgery, and criminal conspiracy," the inspector stated formally as one of the officers placed handcuffs on my son's wrists. David finally looked directly at me, his eyes silently pleading for something I couldn't and wouldn't give him. Forgiveness, perhaps. Intervention. Fatherly protection to rescue him from this disastrous situation. But I remained motionless, watching him with no definite expression. He had crossed lines that allowed no return. The consequences were arriving, as inevitable as the tide. "Dad, please, tell them there's been a misunderstanding. I can explain everything," David yelled as the officers guided him toward one of the patrol cars. "Don't let them take me like this." "I'm your son, your only son." His words echoed in the silent street, where neighbors watched, scandalized, from lit windows. Public humiliation added to the private emotional devastation. But I didn't move. I didn't speak. I simply watched as they placed David in the back seat of the same vehicle where Adam was waiting. The 2 conspirators now shared a confined space, united by the consequences of their criminal actions. Sarah touched my arm gently. "Mr. White, you need to come inside and see what they found. There are things you need to know." He followed Inspector Ramirez into my home. The back door showed obvious marks where they had tried to force the lock with crowbars. Specialized tools were scattered on the hallway floor. Screwdrivers, small saws, electronic devices for disabling alarms. We went up to the 2nd floor, toward my private office. The safe door was slightly damaged, although they hadn't managed to open it completely before the arrest. The inspector pointed to documents found in the criminals' backpacks. Detailed blueprints of your house, with specific notes on the safe's location, family routines, and likely times when the property would be empty. These plans were drawn by someone with intimate knowledge of your home's layout. The handwriting matches samples we took from your son's personal documents. David prepared everything meticulously for weeks. I took the papers with hands that trembled slightly. Seeing David's familiar handwriting on those criminal diagrams was surreal and nauseating at the same time. He had drawn every room with architectural precision, marking entry and escape routes, identifying security cameras and their blind spots, calculating the time needed for each phase of the robbery. Sarah appeared, carrying a cardboard box. "I found this hidden under David's bed when the officers searched his room. Sir, I think you need to see it now." I opened the box, feeling a growing dread. Inside were dozens more documents. My bank statements, which David had copied without authorization, photographs of the inside of the safe, taken secretly when he had legitimate access months ago, preliminary contracts with forged signatures, trying to obtain lines of credit using my name as a co-signer. But the most disturbing thing was at the bottom of the box. A spiral notebook containing handwritten notes, detailing alternative plans if the robbery failed. One page specifically described the possibility of forging a broad power of attorney that would allow him to sell properties in my name. Another page contemplated scenarios where I might suffer some incapacitating accident, leaving him as the sole heir and administrator of my estate. "David wasn't just planning to rob you this one time," Sarah said, her voice cracking with genuine horror. He was thinking of ways to eventually take total control of everything you own. I closed the notebook, feeling violently ill. My son wasn't acting out of momentary desperation. This was calculated ambition, systematic greed, a conscious willingness to destroy me financially if it became necessary to satisfy his needs. Inspector Ramirez took detailed photographs of the notebook and all the compromising documents while I sat in my office chair, processing the full magnitude of the betrayal. Each page revealed deeper levels of malicious planning. David didn't just make a desperate mistake. He systematically built a strategy to strip me of everything I had built over decades of honest work. "Mr. White, I need to ask you some formal questions for the record," the inspector indicated, taking a digital recorder from his briefcase. "With your permission, I will record this conversation as part of the official investigation." I nodded mechanically. The next 2 hours passed in an exhaustive interrogation where I chronologically reconstructed all the events. David's frequent requests for money, his behavioral changes, Adam's visits, Sarah's warning message, my decision to return early from the beach. The inspector took meticulous notes, interrupting occasionally to clarify specific details or request exact dates. "The forged bank documents are particularly serious," the inspector commented, showing me enlarged copies where my supposed signature appeared with obvious inconsistencies. "Your son tried to get loans totaling $120,000 using your identity. 3 applications were rejected for administrative irregularities, but 2 are still in the approval process. If those loans had been authorized, you would be legally responsible for debts you never contracted. $120,000. The figure was astronomical. David wasn't just looking to solve his $38,000 of immediate debt. He was planning to enrich himself considerably by exploiting the credit reputation I had carefully built over my entire professional life. The absolute audacity of his intentions left me breathless. "We also reviewed the cell phone seized from Vance," the inspector continued, sliding his electronic tablet toward me, showing screenshots. "We found WhatsApp conversations between him and your son dating back to February 2024. Here, David specifically discusses how much money is in the safe, mentions jewelry inherited from his late mother, describes property documents that could be sold quickly on the black market." I read the messages, feeling each word like a renewed stab. David spoke of my deceased wife's jewelry as simple, tradable commodities. Those pieces had incalculable sentimental value for me, tangible memories of 40 happy years of marriage. To him, they were just liquid assets with no emotional meaning. One particular message chilled my blood. "The old man trusts me blindly. He'll never suspect a thing until it's too late. By then, we'll be long gone with the money." David wrote that just 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks during which I continued to treat him with unconditional love, inviting him to family dinners, planning that beach trip that was supposed to celebrate his birthday. "There's more," the inspector added with a grave expression. "We found drafts of unsent emails on David's phone, addressed to contacts abroad. He was researching possibilities of transferring large sums of money to offshore accounts in tax havens. He was clearly planning to flee the country once the robbery was complete." The full picture emerged with devastating clarity. David didn't just plan to rob me and continue living normally, eventually facing me. He intended to disappear, taking my money, leaving me financially and emotionally destroyed, likely with no chance of recovering anything. Patricia and his pregnancy would also be abandoned, left with no resources or explanations. "Does Patricia know any of this?" I asked suddenly, remembering my pregnant daughter-in-law who was surely wondering where her husband was tonight. "We sent officers to her home an hour ago to inform her of the situation," the inspector replied. "According to the report, she was in complete shock. She kept insisting there must be some mistake, that her husband would never do something like this. She is being treated by emergency medical services due to her pregnancy and the emotional impact of the news." Additional guilt piled onto the mountain of toxic emotions I was already carrying. Patricia was innocent in all of this. A collateral victim of David's criminal actions, now facing the possibility of raising a baby alone while her husband served time in prison. The damage my son caused was spreading in concentric circles, affecting people who loved and trusted him. Sarah entered the office carrying a tray with coffee that no one had asked for, but that we all needed. Her eyes were red, showing recent tears. She had worked in this house for 15 years. She watched David grow up since he was 19. She considered him practically family. Discovering his criminal nature probably devastated her almost as much as it did me. "Mr. White, Patricia just arrived," Sarah announced in a trembling voice. "She's in the living room asking to speak with you urgently. The paramedics are with her, but she insisted on coming." I went down the stairs, each step feeling like a mountain I had to climb. Patricia was sitting on the sofa, one hand protectively on her 4-month pregnant belly. Her face showed marks of intense crying, smeared makeup, the expression of someone whose world has just completely collapsed. 2 paramedics stood nearby, monitoring her vital signs with portable equipment. "Mark, tell me this isn't true," she pleaded in a broken voice as soon as she saw me enter. "Tell me David didn't do what the police are saying. There has to be an explanation. Some terrible misunderstanding." I sat beside her, taking her cold hands in mine. "Patricia, I wish I could tell you it's a mistake, but all of it is true. David planned to rob us. He has massive debts with criminals. He forged my signature on bank documents. The evidence is irrefutable." She sobbed uncontrollably, covering her face. "How could he do this to me? How could he do this to our baby?" "I'm pregnant with his child, and he chose to conspire with criminals rather than ask for help like a decent person." I had no comforting answers to offer. I was asking myself the same torturous questions. How did David lose his entire moral compass? At what point did he stop caring about hurting those who loved him? The answers remained elusive, buried in some dark corner of his psychology that I would probably never fully understand. "Patricia, I promise you, you will not be left unsupported," I said finally. "This baby is my grandchild. You will both receive all the necessary support, no matter what happens with David." She nodded weakly as the paramedics offered her a mild sedative, which she refused. She wanted to stay conscious, to process everything despite the unbearable pain. The following days passed in a blur of endless legal procedures. David remained in preventive detention while the district attorney built their case. Adam Vance and his 2 accomplices faced similar charges, though with additional aggravators due to their prior criminal records. The judicial process moved with surprising speed, given the overwhelming amount of physical and digital evidence collected. I hired Robert Sands, one of the most respected lawyers in the city, specializing in property law and financial fraud. Robert was 55, with extensive experience in complex cases and an impeccable reputation for rigorous professionalism. We met in his elegantly furnished office, where we exhaustively reviewed every incriminating document. "Mark, I must be completely frank with you," Robert began, after studying the files for 2 continuous hours. "The evidence against David is overwhelming and practically indefensible. The text messages, the forged documents, Vance's testimony corroborated by physical evidence. Any reasonable judge will convict him without significant doubt." I nodded. I expected those words, but they still felt like heavy blows. What kind of sentence would he face, considering the cumulative severity of the crimes? Criminal organization, attempted aggravated robbery, repeated document forgery, attempted bank fraud. We are talking about 4 to 6 years of effective prison time, with no possibility of parole, Robert explained, adjusting his glasses as he consulted updated penal codes on his computer. 4 to 6 years. David would be almost 40 when he got out. His professional life destroyed, his marriage likely over, his relationship with his child non-existent during the most crucial formative years. The consequences extended devastatingly into the foreseeable future. "But there is another, equally urgent matter we must attend to immediately," Robert continued, opening a different folder. "You need to legally protect your assets. David is still listed as the primary beneficiary in your current will. He has broad power of attorney that theoretically allows him to access bank accounts and make decisions about properties in your name if you were to become incapacitated." The reality of those words shook me violently. In my emotional vulnerability, I had completely forgotten those crucial administrative details. David still retained legal access to everything I owned based on trust I granted years ago, when I still thought I knew my son. "What specifically do I need to do?" I asked, feeling a renewed urgency. Robert laid out several pre-filled documents, waiting only for my signatures. "First, we will immediately revoke all powers of attorney granted to David. Second, we will amend your will, removing him as a beneficiary. Third, we will formally notify all your financial institutions of the situation to freeze any access he might have. Fourth, we will initiate separate civil lawsuits, demanding compensation for damages caused by his attempts at fraud. I signed each document with a hand that trembled slightly. Each stroke of the pen represented a definitive break with the past, a legal acknowledgement that my son was dead to me in every practical sense, even though his heart was still beating in a cell several miles away. "And Patricia?" I asked, remembering my daughter-in-law who was going through this nightmare carrying an innocent life in her womb. "I recommend establishing a specific trust for your unborn grandchild," Robert suggested. "That way, you guarantee the baby has secured resources without David being able to access or manipulate those funds from prison or after serving his sentence. I also suggest including Patricia as a secondary beneficiary with specific conditions that protect her interests without creating unsustainable dependency." The idea made perfect sense. My grandchild should not pay for his father's crimes. Patricia didn't deserve to suffer any more than the inevitable emotional pain she was already experiencing. I instructed Robert to prepare all the necessary documentation, with no budget limitations. I wanted impenetrable legal shields protecting the innocent in this tragedy. "There is one additional detail I discovered while investigating David's finances," Robert mentioned, his expression uncomfortable. "For the last 6 months, he was selling confidential information about your company's business operations to Adam Vance, who then used that data to manipulate investments in parallel markets. Technically, that constitutes industrial espionage, in addition to all the other charges." I closed my eyes, feeling that familiar nausea. Every new revelation added additional layers of betrayal. David didn't just attack me personally as a father. He also professionally sabotaged my business, which I built from scratch 30 years ago. He sold trade secrets to unscrupulous criminals, who likely caused financial losses to innocent clients trusting in my company's integrity. "Quantify all possible damages and add them to the civil suits," I ordered, my voice hardened by cold determination. "I want David to face absolutely every consequence of his actions, without any mitigation for family sentiment." Robert nodded, taking additional notes. We worked for 4 more hours, reviewing every legal detail imaginable. When I finally left his office, the sun was setting, painting the sky in reddish tones that seemed to foretell more storms to come. I drove directly to the hospital, where Patricia had been admitted again that morning due to complications related to extreme stress during the pregnancy. I found her lying in a hospital bed, connected to monitors measuring the baby's heartbeat. Her face showed a deep exhaustion that transcended the merely physical. "Mark, thank you for coming," she whispered weakly, reaching her hand out to me. "The doctors say the baby is stable, but I must remain on absolute bed rest for the next few weeks. The stress is affecting my blood pressure dangerously." I sat by her bed, taking her cold hand. "Don't worry about anything related to money or logistics. I've hired private nurses to care for you when you're discharged. I will pay all medical expenses, no matter the cost. Your only job is to stay healthy for that baby." Tears rolled down her cheeks. "David called me from jail yesterday. He was crying, begging me to visit him, to talk to you so you would help him. I hung up the phone. I can't see him right now. I don't know if I can ever see him again after what he did." David's trial began in November 2024. The courtroom was packed with journalists, onlookers, and families of the secondary victims affected by the industrial espionage David had perpetrated. I sat in the front row next to Robert Sands, watching as my son was brought in, handcuffed, from the holding cells. David had lost noticeable weight during his 4 months in preventive detention. His face was bearded and unkempt, his eyes had deep dark circles, and he had the empty gaze of someone who has abandoned all hope. Our eyes met briefly as the guards led him to the defense table. In his eyes, I saw a desperate plea, a silent beg for some saving intervention on my part. But I deliberately looked away, denying him even that minimal comfort of paternal acknowledgement. I had made unbreakable decisions over these months, and I would not allow residual emotions to weaken my resolve. The prosecutor presented his case methodically over 2 full days. He projected the compromising messages between David and Adam onto large screens. He showed photographs of the forged documents. He played recordings of statements where Adam detailed every phase of the conspiracy. He called expert witnesses who analyzed the fraudulent signatures, confirming they were crude imitations of my authentic one. Sarah testified as a key witness. She recounted in a trembling voice how she accidentally discovered the compromising conversations, how she decided to alert me despite the personal risk, how she found the incriminating notebooks hidden under David's mattress. The defense attorney tried to discredit her testimony, suggesting she had personal motivations against my son, but Sarah stuck to her story consistently, with no detectable contradictions. Patricia did not attend the trial. She had given birth prematurely in October to a healthy baby boy whom she named Gabriel, in honor of her deceased maternal grandfather. The doctors attributed the premature birth directly to the traumatic stress of this whole situation. She presented her testimony via video conference from her home, explaining through tears how she discovered her husband's double life, how he systematically hid his growing debts from her, and how she now faced raising a newborn alone while processing the devastating betrayal. The most shocking moment came when the prosecutor projected excerpts from David's personal notebook, where he detailed hypothetical scenarios of my death or incapacitation. If the old man had a stroke, I would have total control through the power of attorney David had written in clear handwriting in an entry dated in May. I could sell the secondary properties without anyone questioning the transactions. No one would suspect if everything looks legally correct. Hearing those words read aloud by the prosecutor turned my stomach violently. David didn't just contemplate robbing me. He actively speculated on taking advantage of my possible death for personal gain. The son I carried in my arms as a baby, whom I taught to read and write, whom I supported at every stage of his life, had come to consider my death a convenient financial opportunity. David's defense attorney tried weak arguments about gambling addiction being an illness that diminished his criminal responsibility. He presented psychiatric evaluations suggesting my son suffered from impulse control disorders exacerbated by pressure from Adam. But the prosecutor shattered those arguments, showing how David meticulously planned every detail for months, demonstrating full cognitive capacity and conscious premeditation. David had the opportunity to testify in his own defense on the last day of the trial. He took the stand with slow movements, looking frequently toward where I was sitting, as if searching for some sign of forgiveness or support. He began with a broken voice. "I recognize that I made terrible mistakes. Addictions consumed me to the point where I lost all sense of morality, but I never stopped loving my father and my family." His words sounded hollow, rehearsed by his lawyer to generate sympathy from the jury. He spoke for 20 minutes, trying to present himself as a victim of unfortunate circumstances rather than a calculating perpetrator. He mentioned financial pressures, threats from Adam, desperation to protect Patricia from the knowledge of his debts, all carefully formulated to evoke compassion. When the prosecutor aggressively questioned him about the detailed plans in his personal notebook, David stammered incoherently, without convincing answers. Those were just fantasies, written in moments of extreme desperation. I never would have acted on those thoughts, he insisted weakly. Fantasies? The prosecutor retorted with cutting sarcasm. Drawing precise architectural plans of the family home, marking entry routes for criminals. Was that also a fantasy? Forging your father's signature on 6 different bank documents. Was that just imagination? David visibly crumbled under the cross-examination, finally admitting the severity of his actions, though still trying to minimize his moral culpability. The jury watched with expressions that wavered between disgust and pity, but were clearly leaning toward conviction. The deliberations lasted barely 4 hours. The verdict came back unanimous. Guilty on all charges. The judge scheduled the formal sentencing for 2 weeks later. David would spend that time back in jail, waiting to find out exactly how many years he would spend behind bars. During those 2 weeks, I received 11 letters from David sent from his cell, all begging for forgiveness, pleading for me to intercede with the judge, promising to change radically if I gave him one more chance. Every letter remained unopened, piling up in my desk drawer. I had no interest in reading more desperate lies. On the day of the sentencing, I arrived at the courthouse early. The judge, a stern man in his 60 seconds with a reputation for toughness, carefully reviewed all the aggravating and mitigating factors before delivering his final decision. David White has been found guilty of criminal organization, attempted aggravated robbery, repeated document forgery, multiple counts of attempted bank fraud, and industrial espionage. Considering the extensive premeditation, the abuse of family trust, the emotional damage caused, and the lack of genuine remorse, this court sentences you to 4 years of prison, with no possibility of early parole. David sobbed audibly upon hearing the sentence. 4 years. His lawyer had hoped to get 3 with good conduct, reducible to 2, but the judge was inflexible. The guards lifted him up to escort him back to the holding cell when David cried out desperately, "Dad, please, look at me. Say something." I remained motionless, my face expressionless, denying him any response he might interpret as weakness or a future possibility of reconciliation. 3 years have passed since that terrible day on the beach, when I received Sarah's message that irrevocably changed my life. Today is March 2027. As I write these lines in my renovated office, I can hear childish laughter coming from the yard, where Patricia is playing with Gabriel, my 2.5-year-old grandson, who barely knows his biological father exists. David served his full sentence, with no reductions for good conduct. He got out of prison 4 months ago, physically gaunt and apparently emotionally destroyed. He tried to contact me immediately, phone calls that I blocked, text messages that I deleted without reading, physical letters that Sarah returned, marked recipient refuses correspondence. One afternoon in January, he showed up in front of my house, waiting for 5 hours in the persistent rain until I finally agreed to see him for one time only. It was a brief, cold, definitive conversation. We sat in my office, separated by the desk we once shared when he was my trusted power of attorney. Now, that piece of furniture represented an uncrossable barrier between two strangers who were once father and son. "Dad, I've had 3 years to reflect on everything I did," David began, his voice hoarse from months of forced silence in prison. "There are no words to express my regret. I destroyed everything valuable in my life because of stupid greed and uncontrollable addiction. I'm begging you, give me a chance to prove I've genuinely changed." I watched him without any discernible emotion. He had aged considerably during his incarceration. He was 37, but easily looked 45. Deep wrinkles lined his forehead. Premature gray streaked his dark hair. His hands trembled slightly with that characteristic tremor of someone who has spent years in high-stress environments. "David, listen carefully, because I will never repeat this," I said, my voice measured, devoid of paternal warmth. "What you destroyed cannot be rebuilt. Trust takes decades to build and seconds to demolish. You chose to dynamite our bond when you decided to betray me in the most vile way imaginable. There is no coming back from that point. But I'm your son. We're family." "Families forgive," he insisted, desperation seeping into his voice. "You were my son," I corrected, emphasizing the past tense. "That title implies mutual respect, basic loyalty, fundamental decency. You violated all of those principles when you planned to rob me, forge my signature, and sell my company's trade secrets. Someone capable of those actions against his own father does not deserve to still be called a son." David began to cry openly, choked sobs that he probably hoped would soften my position. But I had already cried all my tears during the first 6 months after his arrest. I processed my grief. I accepted the loss. I rebuilt my life around the void he left. His current tears didn't awaken compassion, but rather a cold annoyance at the transparent emotional manipulation. "And Gabriel?" he finally asked between hitches. "He's my son. I have a legal right to know him, to be part of his life." "Legally, yes. Although Patricia obtained a temporary restraining order that severely limits your supervised visits," I replied, consulting documents Robert Sands had prepared in anticipation of this exact conversation. "But morally, a father who planned to rob his own grandfather does not deserve to influence that child's upbringing. Patricia has decided that Gabriel will grow up without knowing you until he is old enough to understand what kind of man you really are." "That's unnecessary cruelty. You're using my son as a weapon to punish me," David yelled, rage momentarily replacing the self-pity. "No," I replied with icy calm. "I am protecting my grandson from toxic influences that could warp his moral development. Gabriel has lived with me and Patricia on this property since he was born. He has stability, unconditional love, and a daily example of integrity. You would only bring confusion and dysfunctional patterns that would take us years to correct." David stood up abruptly, slamming the desk with impotent frustration. "I spent 4 years in prison. I paid my debt to society. I deserve a second chance." "You paid your legal debt," I conceded, standing up as well to indicate this meeting was over. "But there are moral and emotional debts that no judge can quantify, and no cell can repay. You destroyed the trust, that was the foundation of our relationship. That kind of damage isn't repaired by the simple passage of time or by empty declarations of regret. I walked him to the front door, where Sarah was waiting, ready to ensure he left the property without incident. David paused on the threshold, looking toward the yard where Gabriel was running, chasing butterflies under Patricia's smiling supervision. I saw genuine pain cross his face as he observed the domestic scene from which he was permanently excluded. "That boy will never even know I exist, will he?" he whispered, his voice broken. "He will know he had a biological father who made catastrophically bad decisions," I answered honestly. "When he turns 18, Patricia will show him all the court documents. She will explain exactly what happened. Then Gabriel will decide for himself if he wants to meet you or maintain the distance we established to protect him. But that will be his choice as an adult, not yours and not mine." David nodded, defeated, understanding the futility of continuing to argue. He walked slowly away down the entry path, shoulders slumped, carrying the weight of the irreversible consequences that he himself had meticulously crafted with every selfish decision during those dark months of 2024. I closed the door and returned to the yard, where Gabriel was running toward me, yelling, "Grandpa!" with the pure joy that only small children possess. I lifted him into my arms, feeling his comforting weight, his contagious laugh, his simple, unconditional love. This child represented the possibility of a better future, a chance to break destructive cycles, a hope that one generation could learn from the devastating mistakes of the previous one. Patricia approached, placing her hand gently on my shoulder. "Was it very hard?" she asked, referring to the encounter with David. "It was necessary," I replied simply. "He needed to hear directly that there is no path back. Maybe now he can finally start to rebuild his life somewhere else, far away from us." That night, after putting Gabriel to bed with stories of heroic adventures starring brave grandfathers and curious grandsons, I sat in my office in front of the safe that David tried to rob 3 years ago. It now contained something different, besides the cash and jewelry. My updated will, leaving absolutely everything to Gabriel under Patricia's administration until my grandson turns 25. David was not mentioned on any page. Legally, he had ceased to exist as my heir. If you liked this story, give the video a like, subscribe to William's Revenge Stories, and share your thoughts in the comments. To hear the next story, click the box on the left. Thanks for watching.